Good afternoon. I want to start with an announcement. I want to state formally that the Ministries of Defense of Germany, Italy, and the U.S. Yesterday signed an agreement of intent to negotiate a Memorandum of Understanding for the Medium Extended Air Defense System, which is affectionately known as the MEAD system. This is a system we're developing with our allies to provide defense against missile attacks, against maneuver forces and other critical assets in places such as Europe or other places where forces are maneuvering. So this was announced last year, the program, by Paul Kaminsky and Jan Lodel down here as an important allied air defense program, and it's going forward. France was at one point scheduled to be a participant and may still be a participant, but was not able to sign the statement of intent to negotiate an MOU at this time. We hope that later on they will be able to. With that, I'll take your questions. Charlie.
A senior defense official said this morning, defense breakfast, that the United States, short of using a nuclear weapon, does not now have the earth-penetrating conventional weapons to destroy the plant near Tahuna. Is the United States prepared to use a nuclear weapon to do that?
Well, Charlie, the Tahuna issue has been in the news for the last couple of weeks, and it should rightly be in the news because it's the building of a chemical weapons plant or chemical weapons storage facility in this day and age in the Middle East is not in the interest of peace, not in the interest of stability, and not in the interest of world order. But there are many steps to stop this facility in Libya before we get to military options. We have already launched diplomatic initiatives. That's why the Secretary brought this up with President Mubarak in Egypt. That's why he's spoken about it forthrightly and publicly. We think this is a regional problem first, and it should be dealt with on a regional issue as well as on an international basis. There are also business and economic ways to choke this project. We've choked a chemical weapons project in Libya in the past by putting pressure on supplier countries, and we're prepared to do that again. So there are a number of ways to pursue stopping this project short of military options. I think discussion of military options right now, and particularly nuclear options, is premature. We ought to focus on the diplomatic and business options first.
What the Secretary has said, that the United States will not allow Libya to begin producing these weapons. If Libya begins producing these weapons and the United States has not yet a conventional weapon to destroy it, would the United States use a nuclear weapon?
Libya is a country that has used chemical weapons in the past against the people of Chad. It used them in 1987. We take very seriously and ominously Libya's continuing program of chemical weapons. It's premature now to talk about military options. They obviously remain for us if the diplomatic and the economic options don't succeed. This plant or facility is not in operation yet. It probably won't be in operation for at least a year. It gives us some time to work diplomatically and economically against it, and that's what we're doing.
It seemed the key word here is option. Now, Secretary Perry, in a speech as recently as today, made it clear that the United States retains the option to use nuclear weapons in the event of the use of weapons of mass destruction against the United States. I guess what we're asking here is, in the case of Libya, while there are many, many options that may be used first, does the United States retain the option of using some type of nuclear weapon to take out that plant as a last resort?
What the Secretary has said is that we retain the option to respond with devastating force against any country that uses chemical or biological weapons. That was something that we believe that threat to respond with devastating force was something that may have deterred Iraq from using chemical weapons during Desert Storm. we believe that countries all over the world should take that threat seriously. He has said that devastating force could include the use of nuclear weapons. He hasn't said that it would, but he said it could. He said that before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, so it's not breaking new ground to say it again here. I think you were there when he said this, and everybody understood the context in which he said it.
All I was saying is, given that he's willing to say it in that context, could
This
you not
is a different
say-
context, isn't it?
It is a different context, so we're asking in this context, would the United States, does it retain the option of using a nuclear weapon?
We retain the option of protecting our interests. The Secretary has spoken about one context in which chemical or biological weapons are used as weapons of mass destruction. We retain the right to respond. He has said that it is our goal to prevent this facility from from coming into use. I've told you that there are diplomatic and business options we're pursuing before we get to the point of looking at military options. Yes, Barbara.
Since you now have your own experts saying on the record that there is no conventional capability existing to take out Tarhuna, and they also say that there is a growing threat around the world of deeply buried targets, is Secretary Perry giving any thought to trying to boost funding for some of your weapons development programs, accelerate them, solve any of their problems, and try and make them actually work?
Well, first, as you know better than anybody, deeply buried targets is a target set we've been prepared to address for a long time. This is not new with Tarhuna. We have faced deeply buried targets in other countries around the world, and we faced them specifically during Desert Storm. So we have been working for well over 10 years, probably well over 20 years, on weapons to attack deeply buried targets. This is not a new threat, and it's not a new set of weapons development for us. We are now working on a series of weapons, both nuclear and conventional, to deal with deeply buried targets, working on improving weapons we already had. Many of these weapons were started long before Tarhuna became an issue.
May I follow up with a couple
Sure.
of points? You said, and I just want to make sure, because I'm not sure where your sentence ended, are we working on new, you said new nuclear and non-nuclear, and I wanted to be very clear. Are we working on new nuclear weapons or modifying and improving existing nuclear weapons to go
Yes.
out? Which is that, new or improved?
We are modifying existing ones. As I said, this is not a new threat.
Well, I just want to follow up on a couple of more points there. Modifying which ones? Can you tell us?
The one that was mentioned this morning was the B-61.
You are modifying the B-61 to address deeply buried targets.
This has always been a weapon that had some capability, but we're improving that capability.
Okay, my other question then is, sorry to be so nitpicky, but your own experts on the record are now, this morning said you do not have the capability to deal with this target. So the question that I have is, why is the Secretary not considering, or is he considering, anything specific to deal with these targets, which are much, much deeper than anything we've ever addressed in the last 20 years?
We are.
You're doing what?
We are looking at ways to deal with ever deeper targets.
Are you looking to boost existing funding in any of these programs?
Well, we already have some programs underway, and one of those programs is there's an advanced concept technology demonstration project that has 3 parts to it that deal basically with attacking weapons of mass destruction, including ones that are underground. And the 3 parts to that program include developing better sensors to help us locate and monitor weapons of mass destruction sites. Secondly, developing better weapons to attack those sites. They can include penetrators, they can include fire accelerants, they can include other types of weapons that are under development. And the third part involves better ways of integrating intelligence and surveillance to help us with strikes against these. Now, these are programs that have been underway for at least a year or so, and they're moving forward. one of the, frankly, one of the problems we face with an installation that is underground and contains chemical or biological weapons is how to strike it in a way that doesn't contaminate a large area. And that's one of the challenges that we're working on specifically and have been long before the Tarhuna site became an issue. There are several ways to do that, and one of them does involve basically incinerating what's in the underground facility in a way that also seals the facility at the same time. You can see this is a challenge, but it's one that we've undertaken and I think will probably be able to make significant progress on, but it takes time. And however, it's going to take time for the completion of this project. And as I said, we believe the project should be stopped and that it can be stopped diplomatically or economically.
Does Tarhuna contain biological agents as well as
Not that I'm aware of, but we have to prepare weapons to deal with all sorts of threats. And as the Secretary's made very clear, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in chemical and biological forms is one we take seriously. We had a whole report on that.
Is the weapon that would incinerate and seal at the same time, is that the B-61, the
No.
modified?
I'm talking more, what I talked about, the Advanced Concept Technology Development Program focuses on conventional weapons.
So you would look for a conventional weapon that would incinerate and seal at the same time?
Well, that's our hope. That's what we're working on. Now, as I say, these are demanding technological challenges. That's one of the reasons that it takes time. But we're working on this. Jamie.
On the general subject of advanced weapons, Secretary Perry referred to today a joint project underway with Israel involving high-energy lasers to provide I believe he said a missile and rocket defense system. I just wondered if you could tell us any more about that program and whether it would have a capability against the Katyusha rocket.
We have successfully tested a laser defense system against short-range rockets, such as the Katyusha rocket. And we are working on a joint program to develop such a system with the Israelis. The advantage of a laser defense system against rockets is that it's considerably cheaper than a missile defense system against rockets, because the lasers, of course, can be turned on and off in face of a threat. The name of the system is called the Nautilus, and it was tested successfully earlier this year in New Mexico, and it's one of the systems we're developing with the Israelis to continue to provide them with a qualitative edge in their own defense.
Is this a ground-based system?
Yes.
And is there any estimate at this point about when it might be deployable?
No, I think that's still, well, I'm sure there are estimates. I don't know what they are, but it's not immediate.
Is this an ARPA program? Is this a service program?
This is being worked on by the Army Space and Strategic Defense Command.
You know what the funding is for that at this point?
I'm afraid I don't know what the funding is right now.
Is that going to be a subject on Sunday for their discussion?
Yes. The whole question of maintaining Israel's qualitative edge will be a topic, but two specific systems that will be discussed will be the Nautilus system, this laser-based system, and also the Arrow missile, which we're working on with the Israelis, and that's a system to protect them against ballistic missiles. This, to be clear, is designed specifically to deal with Katyusha-type missile rockets, shorter range. Come in, I think, over 500 Katyusha rockets have been fired against Israel in the last week or so, so they come with more regularity than ballistic missiles would. And, of course, they're entirely different battlefield-type weapons than ballistic missiles are. Todd?
What would be the applicable use for the United States military of the Nautilus system, if any, or is it strictly an Israeli system?
Well, we presumably face the same types of threats in certain situations. It would provide increased battlefield protection for us.
So would this be underlaying like the Patriot system, or where? wherever this fits.
Well, this is a much shorter range. We're dealing here with, I don't know what the, I can easily find out, or you can find out in Jane's what the range is of a Katyusha rocket. Maybe Barbara knows. You stand up and give a lecture on the performance. But these rockets were developed by the Soviet Union. They're in many arsenals, and they. Pardon?
What's the range of the laser?
I don't know the performance characteristics of this, and I suspect we aren't going to reveal all the ranges at this stage. Yeah.
And can you bring us up to date on what the Pentagon knows about the fire in the Soviet Union near Chernobyl that apparently may be sending up some radioactive material?
I'm afraid I can't go beyond the news reports on that. I just I don't know. I don't believe we know a lot more at this stage, but we're monitoring it, and we'll try to find out what we can. It's, as I understand it, it's a fire actually outside the Chernobyl complex, or on the periphery of the Chernobyl complex, and I've read that there are now firefighters on the scene fighting this thing. Charlie?
Ken, on the Tarhuna thing, just back to it a minute. If you're talking about, I think you said incinerate, maybe seal area, could this be some kind of, in layperson's terms, kind of an underground fuel air explosive, if that kind
I'm sorry,
of thing?
what did you say?
An underground fuel air explosive, like the, if there's some way to get oxygen to it, is that what you're talking about? A conventional weapon that might do that kind of thing sounds like a kind of a fuel air explosive, something.
I can't describe it beyond what I have as to what it would do. It's a high temperature fire accelerant. If there are probably several ways to do that. Yes.
As I recall, that approximately today or about this time frame was when the services were supposed to report back to Secretary Perry concerning their recommendations for retrofitting passenger-carrying military aircraft with cockpit voice recorders and flight data recorders and GPS systems. Can you give us any update on how many planes are, now that they've had 2 weeks to look at it, how many planes are involved?
They reported yesterday. I can't give you an update. Well, they're going to, the Secretary asked them to, said that the goal was to retrofit all their planes with this, all passenger-carrying planes with this equipment. And they reported yesterday no firm decisions have been made on a schedule for doing it at this stage, but I would expect that to be, those decisions to be made quickly.
When we asked for the specific number of planes involved early on, they said, well, that's one of the things that they're going to determine, so we couldn't get a specific number. Can you take the question about how many planes this now affects?
Sure, we'll take the question.
Also, what cost is involved, which is another one of the...
Well, that's one of the issues that's still being decided. Cost and schedule is still